Hello and welcome to That Anime Pod, the seasonal anime show brought to you by That Nerdy Site. I'm your host, Christian Puente, aka Pixel Brave, and you can follow me on Twitter at Pixel Brave or follow the show at That Anime Pod for any updates on what I'm watching or any other work that I'm doing for That Nerdy Site. And if you'd like, you can support That Nerdy Site on Patreon, visiting us at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. Now let's get to talking about some anime. So I wanted to do a mid-season recap. Every week I've, of course, been giving like my light thoughts on the shows that I've been watching this season. And if you're familiar with anime, you know that sometimes during the season they'll make a 0.5 episode 6.5 or something like that. And in that episode, it's basically a filler meant just to recap everything that's led up to the current state in the season. So that's kind of the spirit for this one. Next week, hopefully we'll have a guest with us. And again, if you'd like to be a guest on the show, there's a Google submission doc on Twitter at That Anime Pod. And please, submit one if you'd like. And I'm happy to get people on here. I had a lot of fun. The previous episode with Tortilla Senpai, thank you again for coming on to talk about My Hero and the overhaul arc. That's a little bit of housekeeping. And let's start with the mini recap of just what I've been watching so far. And then in the mid-season proper recap, I'm going to pick 3 of my top shows from the season so far and going a bit more of a deep dive into those. So let's go ahead with our usual weekly recap. Haikyuu, again, I'm so glad that the show is here. I'm so glad to be with the characters again. The story is really maturing, and I hear that the manga, is almost over. So I think there's technically still 2 more seasons of the show planned, but I'm enjoying so much where the story is going that I think almost that after this season, I think I might just go to the manga and just read the rest of the story, since I really don't think I can wait for however many years it's going to take for the next season of the show. I'm just really enjoying where the story was going so far. I don't know if I mentioned this in a previous episode, but I had just now jumped into a show called Magia Record. It's a spin-off series based off the Madoka Magica anime series, which if you've never seen, it's on Netflix, and I highly recommend it. It takes the typical magical girl storytelling, like what you'd see from Sailor Moon, and like kind of gives it the Christopher Nolan spin, like, hey, what would be the actual emotional and psychological ramifications of kids becoming superheroes? I think another analogy would be, I think it's called The Boys, the superhero show, the live action American TV show about like a much grittier look at superheroes. That's kind of like this, except instead of superheroes, it's like magical girls, which are again like the kind of Japanese anime heroes, like what Sailor Moon is typically high school or middle school girls with powers, and there's usually transformations and magic and stuff like that. So Magia Record is a spin-off based off the mobile game, and it didn't grab me the same way Madoka did. I'm 7 episodes in. I was able to catch up because I didn't start it right away. And I'm digging that we're in the world again, because it's a very interesting look at like it's an interesting take on, well, it takes place in Japan. It's not a fantasy show that takes place like in another world or something like that. But it takes place in Japan, but it's kind of like a futuristic, very interesting architectural. There's just it's an alternate reality kind of thing. So the aesthetic is always really cool, and the action sequences are really interesting too. So I'm liking it so far. Again, the story is not really grabbing me the way the original Madoka did, but I'm kind of curious to see where we are. And I'm halfway through, so if we're at episode 7, I will give it 1 more episode, but I could also see myself dropping it if after episode 8 it's not really doing anything else, because since it is based off a mobile game, the storyline in that is not going to be as well established as an actual original story made specifically to become an anime. It's a bit more bare bones. So we'll see how I feel. Next up, I'm still watching Science Fell in Love, so I tried to prove it. Man, that is such a long title. I will never get over how long the title is. And it's still funny. Right now they're having beach episodes, which are usually in anime like a lot of fan service, which is usually one of the harder episodes to watch. But this one has very light. It's more about just like, I love that this show embraces the lightheartedness of the relationships and the characters and the actual friendship dynamics, and it's actually a lot of fun. It's still very funny. There are the tiniest bits of like kind of fan service, but for a beach episode, it really keeps it mostly to the situational comedy, which is why I like this show so much. It's really funny. Room Camp I'm still enjoying that. Again, Room Camp is the spinoff of Laid Back Camp, and it's just short 3-minute episodes. Get in, get out really quick, and they're just fun little bite-sized stories. Right now, what's going on in the story is that the 3 main characters are going, how there's kind of bar crawls or pub crawls where you like go from bar to bar to bar. They're doing kind of the same thing, but like they're visiting national park, or something kind of equivalent to that. And so yeah, they just visited another one, and I'm sure they'll see a newer one after that. And each one seems to have like a fun little anecdote. And actually, there was a post-credits for the last episode that introduces another character, a kind of a mentor, a veteran camper character from the original show. So I'm eager to see that. In Asteroid in Love, the show about the science club in the school, that had a little bit of development. In the previous episodes, there was a big kind of school festival where the clubs would show off what they've been working on, and it was a very big success for them. So the president and vice president decided, hey, like we need to pass this on now. We feel like we've done everything we can. We think the new generation will continue the club very well, so they hand that off. And so this most recent episode is about them, trying to fill in those shoes for the first time, as in this episode, they kind of do outreach to children. Like they decided to have like an overnight star watching event for young students and stuff, and just kind of like as an outreach thing, which I always think is always really interesting. I would love if I had the opportunity. To those who don't know, I'm into videography and video editing, and I'd love to host like a photography camp or a videography camp or something like that in the future. So I really liked this episode. I don't know if I could say I jumped into, but a new show started up like halfway into the season, and we got a new show. It's currently 3 episodes in, but I've only seen the first 2, but it's an idol anime. And to those who are not as familiar, in Japan, part of their entertainment industry is the idol industry, which idol is kind of a weird word, but that's what the word they choose to use. But really, in our equivalent, it's just kind of like pop star groups. If you're familiar, K-pop has become very popular. So if you've heard of BTS and groups like that, Japan has their own version, but instead of calling them J-pop groups, they call them idol groups. And this is a new, and I like musicals, by the way. I'm in real life, I don't follow K-pop. I don't follow any particular bands or idol groups or anything like that. And there's a lot of idol anime, and I don't watch a lot of those either. But I did catch one, which was called Idol Master, and it's a very popular one. And it has even a whole bunch of spin-offs, but I haven't seen those because the spin-offs don't look as good as the first one. But the first one, I had heard a lot of good things about it, and when I finally checked it out, it was more than met the eye. On the surface, it looks like just kind of like a very silly, light show about young pop idols or something like that. But each episode was very character-centric, and I thought it was just really, really well written. But despite that, I just kind of like, okay, I liked that one, and that's all. I don't really feel like I want to keep checking out more idol shows. But this one that popped up, and it's called 22/7. The art style looked really cool. Like, it looks like it's going to be more of a mature take. And when I started it up, it actually was. It's the kind of, so again, I'm 2 episodes in, and the setup for it is that there's this student. I don't know what grade they're in. Maybe they're high school students, but yeah, I want to say they're probably high school students. But this student gets an invitation to an idol audition, and everyone that shows up at the audition also got these mysterious invitations, and they don't know who scouted them or anything like that, but they were scouted. And yeah, this weird mysterious organization is like trying to bring them together, like kind of Avengers style. And something about the art and the tone seems maybe like it has something to say about the industry. Like, it might be trying to make not exactly satire, but it might be trying to do some kind of social commentary, because the main character is like questioning, like, wait, like, why do we have to do everything you're telling us? Like, why are you asking us to follow you blindly? And again, even though I don't follow the idol or music industry in general on the timeline, I do sometimes see tweets go viral that bring up controversies in the entertainment industry. So I'll still see stuff like that. For example, I do hear that apparently over there in the industry, like the production companies are very hands-on and tell them a lot about what they can and can't do, which we kind of get that here in America. Of course, we have music managers, but apparently over there it's gotten to a level of control that it's kind of controversial. So that this anime might be trying to say something. We'll see. The third episode came out. I haven't seen it yet, but yeah, I'm at least going to give it the third episode try and see. My one thing that I'm not sure I'll continue watching it for, though, is that in the opening sequence, there's a shot where the band is actually performing, but instead of being 2D animation, it's 3D animation, and anime just doesn't do 3D animation very well. It's really jarring. It's totally weird and wonky. It's just not very good. So again, since we're only 2 episodes in, they haven't really started performing a lot or anything like that. But I'm kind of concerned. It is that bad. It looks that bad in the opening to there. If the characters in the show are actually going to be performing and it goes to the CG art style, I'll be like, oh no, this just looks way too weird. So yeah, 22/7, it seems interesting so far, and down the list. Also still keeping up with My Hero Academia. We finally had a proper introduction into the new villain, who his name is, it's something like Mr. Gentleman. I know it's something has to do with being a gentleman. I can't remember exactly the name. But yeah, he's he's a showman. He seems like a ringleader. He's very charismatic and interesting. And I think I don't know if I'm gonna like him as a character, but I do think he's interesting because he kind of is a vigilante / anti-hero. Apparently, he does crimes in order to, I guess, put a spotlight on social injustices. In the most recent episode, he mentioned that there was like a chain of grocery stores or corner stores, and they'd been doing like some malpractice or bad labor laws or something like that. And so he robbed them to get attention on them. And so, yeah, it's an interesting approach, and yeah, we'll see. And the band, the group of students has decided that for the festival, they're going to create a band and perform. And I'm really excited for that because, like I said earlier, I really, really enjoy musicals. So, and we got to hear one of the characters, Jiro, sing for the first time. So that was really cool. That was really cool. And that's pretty much all I've caught up on so far. I'm really liking how this season's going so far. Since we're halfway through, I might need to start making a short list of what might be coming up in the spring season, because that's going to be coming up in a couple weeks here. Maybe in the future, I can do kind of like an early look at spring shows that I might recommend or that might look like they're up my alley. So that's a bit for the recap right now. Let's move on to the topic of the week, which I mentioned before is going to be a deep dive into 3 shows that I'm really enjoying this season. Okay, thanks for joining me again. This is the topic of the week, and I'm diving into 3 shows from this season that are my biggest standouts so far. First, I want to talk about Haikyuu. Haikyuu, to just say a bit about it again, is just a show that's always meant a lot to me. Not always. Well, that's the weird thing about it, is it feels like it's always meant a lot to me, but in reality, when you think about it, I have only started watching the show maybe in the last 2 years. I was introduced to it very, very late, but it pretty much instantly hooked me, and I've rewatched it so often, from beginning to end, the first 2 seasons. To anyone who's not familiar with it, oh wait, actually it's 3 seasons. Yeah, it's 3 seasons, and we're currently in the 4th season. I get the numbers mixed up sometimes, but yeah, it's just a show that has some really awesome characters that you're just constantly rooting for. Whenever there's opponents that they're playing against, you become so invested in those characters as well. It's just so well written. The animation's awesome. The music just totally gets me in the feels. I totally like. It's just awesomely produced show, and I'm glad that it's back. To start kind of talking about the themes that I mentioned. There's Haikyuu is always focused on growth for the characters. We've seen the strengths that all the main players have had ever since the beginning. Even Hinata, who's not he's the least experienced of the whole team, but even him, everyone has their strengths, and even characters who may seemingly not have strengths, such as Yamaguchi, yes, he eventually got a bit proficient with the floating technique. But before, I guess you wouldn't really say that he had many strengths. But if you look at it, each character had a strength in their own way. His wasn't technical. His was more emotional. That's how I looked at it anyways. His strength was that he's a loyal friend. He's someone that would have Tsuki's back. If you take away the whole him learning to have a unique skill like the floating serve, he still has his own arc as a friend to Tsukishima, and he excels as being a loyal friend. So like that's just an example that I always enjoy how the show is about growth, and whether it's growing in friendship or growing as a skill or growing as an individual or growing as a team, the show has always been about growth. But this season, one thing about the growth in this season, what I'm noticing is that it's really challenging yourself as a team, because like the ending of the third season, they had really finally worked through a lot of issues that they had with each other. But this season is about recognizing that, hey, even though we really came together very strong and we are going to use this momentum of this unity in the future spring tournament, it turns out that there's a lot we still have to work on, not just technically, but there are dynamics in this relationship, in our communication, that we got to work on, and it's really going to test our patience with each other, and it's not going to be fun, but it's something that they have to do, again, in order to grow. So it's just, and I don't want to call it a more mature tone, but it is definitely a very tense situation and kind of anxiety inducing, but I am really enjoying the new tone, and the art style is a little different too. I didn't do any research on if I didn't think to do any research, but maybe I should, of if there were any changes in the team, in the animation team or anything like that. But I do notice there's a kind of a difference in the art style. I can't say whether I like it or not. It looks like it's reflecting the manga a bit more. It looks like it's not as it looks like it's embracing more of the sketchy, like I said, kind of manga style instead of a more sleek, made for anime kind of aesthetic. But I ain't mad at it either, because it's either way, it's always a really good looking show. So that is the first one that I did a deep dive on, is Haikyuu. And next, I wanted to talk a little bit about My Hero and how this season's been panning out so far. So this is what people are calling the kind of filler, like not as important season for My Hero. Everyone's saying it's the first filler arc, if you're not familiar. Anime that's a bit more long running, something like Bleach or Dragon Ball or Naruto is a very good example, is that sometimes when there's not enough manga content, they will create new original stories. That way the animation company will have, the studio will still have stories that they can tell while the manga produces more stories for them. And that's not really the case here. There's plenty of manga to tell, and as someone who doesn't read the manga, from what I understand, yeah, this whole school arc does take place in the manga, and so it's not technically filler, but people are treating it as filler since it's leaning more into the slice of life nature of the school life instead of into the superhero stuff. But I'm actually really excited for that. For anyone who's not familiar, I really like slice of life anime, and so this is something. And also, as I mentioned, and I'll probably keep saying again and again, I really love musicals, and so when I saw that the class is going to be forming a band, I became really excited. Another thing for those who don't know is that like I have screenwriting ambitions. I went to college for filmmaking, and it's always been an ambition of mine to produce my own short films and movies even. And the kinds of stories I write are usually, they say write what you like and write what you know. And as someone who's shot a lot of bands in school and even outside of school, like I've just always enjoyed video production when it's tied to music, and so naturally a lot of my stories revolve around music. And so as I'm currently working on like a really big story right now that is it's really funny to watch My Hero unwrap because it's very similar kind of setup. But again, we're not really here to talk about that. We're here to talk about My Hero. But the long and short of it is that I'm very excited to see what My Hero what My Hero Academia's take is going to be on a band coming together. We saw Jiro, who has been a character who's they're kind of a side character if you don't watch My Hero, and they've had a few cool moments in to show off their quirk, which is like sound based. But this time we're kind of getting more of a character moment with them. They are kind of Jiro's kind of the most prominent musician out of the whole class, and so the class is really looking at her and to kind of take the lead on this and show them the ropes. And they even got her to sing, which it was so cool to get another song with lyrics from My Hero. In the first half of the season, there was in the first half of the season, we had Might plus You during the fight scene against Overhaul, and so it's cool to get, I didn't get the name of the song, actually, yeah, I can't think of the name of the song, but it was cool to get a chance to hear a character sing, and it was a really nice song as well, so I probably want to look it up and download it or something. It's a really cool song, if you haven't checked it out yet. Again, sorry if I spoiled that. But yeah, My Hero's looking like it's going to be really cool. All the characters are growing, and we're kind of getting the peak. Now that we've introduced the new villain, we're getting the peek at what his plan is going to be. He's already said that he's going to try to infiltrate UA. And so I'm sure, just the way conflict is written, he will succeed. And so I'm trying, I probably shouldn't do this, but I'm bringing a bit of previous experience with me into this, like thinking of other filler arcs and how usually the stakes aren't as high, and so I'm wondering if this villain will even do anything bad. I'm kind of hoping that whatever he's trying to prove by breaking into UA, maybe he's trying to say, hey, you guys aren't doing a good job of keeping things safe, but he usually, I get the feeling that he doesn't have serious really will intent, so I'm kind of curious to see if him showing up and infiltrating the school after all will end up being something very high stakes or not after all. But I guess we'll see soon, because he's shown up and has already announced his next target for the school. And then thirdly, the breakout show this season for a lot of people. I'm gonna be straight up with you. Like I do listen to other anime podcasts. Before I started this show, I was a big fan of anime podcasts like Kawaii 5.0. Shout out to you, Annie Feminist Podcast, Otaku No Radio. There are some really cool anime podcasts out there, and that's part of the inspiration of what made me want to create this one, is because I want to share my voice and share my affection and my enthusiasm for anime. So I'm not, but, and so where I'm going with that is that I am definitely not alone. The whole internet is falling in love with this show, and that is Keep Your Hands Off Eizouken. And Eizouken, if I'm understanding right, that's like the Japanese pronunciation of what a film club is. Or what an anime club is, I guess. One of the main characters, Tsubasa, who's the model who wants to be an animator, she has one rule from her parents, who usually let her do whatever she wants because she's a model and everything like that. But their one rule for her is don't join the anime team. Don't be an animator. And we haven't really discovered a whole lot about why. There's kind of some hints at that, just something surface level, like, oh, she's just said like, oh, my parents just don't think it's productive. But at the same time, there's so many other clubs that could also seem unproductive. So I feel like we're going to learn something a bit more specific about anime and her family, about why they wouldn't let her. I feel like I might have lost my train of thought with that. But basically where I was going with that is that we are getting a bit more backstory on Tsubasa, and we had a flashback episode in the most recent episode, which was her as a child learning the principles of animation. And oh, I remember now where I was going with that. Basically, that's why the name of the show is Keep Your Hands Off Eizouken, because Eizouken apparently means anime club, and Tsubasa is not allowed to join the anime club. So that's where that title comes from. Keep Your Hands Off Eizouken, Keep Your Hands Off Anime Club. Cool. I'm glad I remembered where my train of thought was going with that. So fast forwarding, like I was saying, in this most recent episode, it was really cool to get a backstory. The show begins, like the very first episode of the show, we already see Asakusa's origin in that she saw anime once as a child and realized, oh wow, people make this thing. And with Tsubasa, it was a bit different. It was more seeing a real life example and noticing, hey, in movement, there's different arcs and principles of how things move. There's a flow to how things move, from things rocking and moving and thrown. Like there's just an arc to movement, and she noticed that at a young age and started studying that and started applying that to animation. And it was just a really it was really cool to get a chance to see that. This show in general is something that I really enjoy shows about people making things, and so to see a show about people making anime is one of my favorite topics, because over the past couple of years, ever since I got back into anime, I've also taken an interest in like the behind the scenes of it, because I think it's really interesting. I used to like drawing when I was a kid, but I never really thought about animation much. I get the principles is that, a picture to a picture to a picture, once you play it in succession, it creates the illusion of movement. But the actual industry, like when you take the more serious deep dive look into it and see the production pipeline, I just am completely fascinated by it. And of course there's also the side of me as a storyteller that really like seeing young future storytellers go through the kinds of journey that I went. It's very nostalgic. It kind of reminds me, these three kids, Sakusa and Tsubasa and Kanamori, they're just kind of a ragtag fun group. It kind of reminds me of the Sandlot vibe. It's very just like backyard baseball kind of feel of just like these kids, they want to do this thing and it's going to be fun, and it inspires their inspiration, and it's just it takes me back to my first years doing filmmaking in high school. My friends and I, we weren't part of an official film club, but we would get together on weekends, have these poorly written scripts, and we would go into construction sites and I'm being exaggerating when I say break into, but we would film in places we probably shouldn't film because it was higher production value. So I totally get that energetic spirit of like following your gut. You want to make something, go make something. And if you're not allowed to, just don't get caught. So it's been a real treat to kind of get a refresher on the anime production process, and just to see the really cool visual sequences that they have that are just very imaginative. The music and the art in this is also amazing. So those are the three shows that among my usual weekly recaps, these three really stand out as like my big three of this season so far. So I hope you guys have been checking these out. Otherwise I've definitely been spoiling things for you, but these are really great shows, and I'm very happy to be checking them out. And with that, let's keep on going. So I hope you guys enjoyed that a bit of a deeper dive into my impressions on three of my favorite shows this current winter anime season. And it's funny, I was talking to Trevor, who of course runs that nerdy site, and he just expressing his kind of frustration that like the way that the anime calendar works is that right now it feels very much like spring, but it's considered the winter anime season. And as we get close to summer, we'll be going into the spring. And so it is kind of a funny disconnect we have when we're trying to communicate about what season we're in. But yes, currently we've reached the halfway point of the winter 2020 season. And yeah, I'd really like in a future episode to talk about what the spring might be holding for us. Thank you for tuning into this mid-season recap. I'm going to put the question out for next week of what you guys have been watching this season. Now that we're halfway through, has anything come on the chopping block list, and something that you didn't decide to keep up with, or maybe there's something that you picked up with kind of like I did at the last minute. And I'd definitely love to hear what you guys are watching these days. Again, since this is kind of like a filler, a 0.5 episode, again, it's also because we're that nerdy site is ramping up because we're going to go to PAX East. And so I don't know how big the reach is even on this show. But if you are a fan of That Nerdy Site and That Anime Pod, definitely keep an eye out on the Twitter, and I will be mentioning when I'm out and about in PAX. And if you like the show, yeah, definitely let us know on any of our review options on iTunes and Spotify if you enjoy the show. Also, if you feel like helping out the show, feel free to subscribe to us on Patreon at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. That's what makes this whole show possible. And again, since this is a recap, kind of more of a focused mid-season centric episode, we won't be doing Culture Corner or Question of the Week or anything like that, but we will be exiting, as we usually do, to the sweet, sweet tunes brought to you by Grimecraft in Lonely Rolling Star Remix in cooperation with Game Chops. It's a wonderful tune. I hope you guys are enjoying it just like me. Everybody give Grimecraft a shout out and thank him for this song. Anyways, I will see you guys next week. I will try to bring a guest with me, and I will see you guys next time.